Did you know there can be 80,000 honeybees in a hive midsummer? That is a lot of bees. Today we are talking about honeybees and buckwheat, a great planting that you can do in your garden to help honeybees and lots of other pollinators. All right, it's hot in here. Hi, I'm Amy Landers with Gardens That Matter, where we help families create beautiful, bountiful gardens together. And I've actually been out in my bees this morning. They get the nice button-down shirt because it's a great shirt. It's nice and thick and it can protect me if I do have a bee that wants to sting me. But I want to talk to you guys about bees today, honeybees. Whew, I really am sweating. We are talking pollinators all week long. We're going to cap it off with a big pollinator workshop where we're going to have a menu and you're going to create your own beautiful meal for pollinators and more. Not just their food, but everything that they need in your yard. So on Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, I would love for you to join me for that workshop. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about how to really create a pollinator paradise. And there's a link for that in the description. Now, as you are joining me, in the comments, tell me, how do you feel about bees? How do you feel about bees? If you're watching this recording later, go for it. Type it in when you are watching the recording, because I come back and I'll read the comments later. So, how do you feel about bees? Are you excited when you see a bee in your garden? Do you feel nervous? Do they make you kind of feel happy to see them, but you want them to leave you alone? Are you just absolutely fascinated with them? I am, for sure. Bees are incredible. So today we're talking specifically about honeybees, but there are thousands and thousands of different kinds of native bees. I know I have the number written down for you guys. Yeah, 20,000 different kinds of bees on Earth. Today we're talking about the honeybee, which is actually native to Europe and Asia. And they came with Europeans to North America. So they're not a native bee, but this species of bee, Apis melliflora, has really co-evolved with humans. They have become very dear to us. We love honey, we love beeswax, we love having these hives in our communities. And they've benefited from that, and so have we. So it's been a great partnership, just like you can think about other things that we've domesticated, right? So bees are somewhat domesticated. We'll talk a little bit about feral bees in a few minutes, but you can think about dogs and cats. We've spread them as we've moved, humans, around the world. So honeybees are like that. They came across on ships. Can you imagine? Bee hives on a ship. Incredible. But then they've done really well here. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I'm still a little out of breath from being inside the bee hat a minute ago. So how about, now I would love to hear from you about, do you have bees in your yard? Do you see them in your garden? Do you see honeybees? Honeybees have this characteristic, find a couple pictures here, close-up pictures for you guys. I was going to try to go live from the beehive this morning, but the wireless doesn't reach that far, and it probably would have been kind of crazy because I would have talked to you through my veil the whole time, which would have been kind of weird to have a whole conversation with you that way. But yeah, so they have this typical nice fuzzy body, head, thorax, abdomen, right? Insects. 2 pairs of wings, nice clear wings, a kind of yellowish with black stripes abdomen. And so that's your typical honeybee. There are lots of other native bees. We talked about bumblebees last week. You can check that video out from last week in our feed. And we'll talk about another native bee towards the end of this week. We're going to talk about some other native bees. But honeybees, do you see them in your yard? If you see one, do you know what it is? Now, you probably have them in your yard because honeybees are really good at reproducing, and their whole goal is to reproduce the colony. The colony they are social insects, and all of the insects in the species are part of this colony, right? So the hive mind, you know, we have that phrase to think about the hive mind, like when people are in sync and we're all working together, hive mind, right? Bees are the inspiration for that, right? So everybody in the hive has a job, and the one that we think of the most is the queen. So let's see, I have a game for you. This is the Find the Queen game. Let's see here. Yeah, I've got two different ones for you to find. Okay, I'm going to hold it as still as I can. And can you find the queen in this picture? If you see her, you can type in, I see her. All right, I'm going to tell you the answer. If you want to keep looking, hit pause and go back a second. All right, so the queen has this nice elongated abdomen, and there she is. She's laying an egg in that cell. So you can see how much longer her abdomen is, nice and golden. So sometimes when you're looking at a frame of bees, your eyes just are like bing, and you just see her because she just looks so much. She's a lot bigger, and then she has that big abdomen, and she's real golden often. All right, here's another one. Let's see if you can find her in this one. She's a little less golden in this one. All right, let me hold it up. See if I can hold it real steady for you. Can you find the queen? All right, here's the answer. There she is, up in the top corner. And so she's a little bit less golden. Her wings are kind of covering her up too, but you can still see that long abdomen, right? So the queen bee is really at the heart of a hive, but she really has just one main job, and that is to lay eggs. A queen bee can lay 1,000 to 2,000 eggs per day. That is amazing, right? It's actually a really hard job. She doesn't just like lays around in the in the colony having the workers feed her. She is like laying eggs the whole time. And she has a pheromone that she produces, a chemical signal that's a smell, basically, that the other bees can smell, that says all is well, the hive is good, all is well. But if she starts to, gets older, her egg production drops off, or if for some reason the queen dies or goes missing, the worker bees know, right? The pheromone changes, or the pheromone's not there, and the worker bees know, uh-oh, we don't have a queen. We've got to do something about this. And sometimes if she's older, they will start, well, either way, they can take an egg, or a pretty young larva, and they will feed it special food. Special bee bread and royal jelly is what they feed a queen bee larva. And so they will feed the larva this special royal jelly, and it will develop into a reproductive female, a queen. And then sometimes the new queen will hatch, and like the old queen and the new queen will fight it out. Sometimes the new queen will hatch and one of the queens will leave the hive, and that's when you see a swarm. So I'll add a picture of that in the comments after we're off. But the queen bee really is like the key to the hive kind of being a happy, steady hive. When she's laying steadily and that pheromone is there, all the rest of the worker bees know what their job is. All right, now, how long does a queen bee last? Her lifespan's usually about 2 years. And then naturally the worker bees will make a new queen when they need one. And then sometimes you have that drama of the bees fighting it out, or the one queen swarming and going to create another colony. Sometimes in spring you'll have swarms. That's when you usually see them, because the hive will be making so many babies and there'll be so many bees and it'll start to get crowded, and they just know, like, we need to spread out. We need to be two colonies instead of one, and so you'll see that happen a lot of times in spring. So have you ever seen a swarm of bees? Have you ever had this happen in your neighborhood or in your yard? They'll just be basically like a ball of bees, maybe about maybe a little smaller than a basketball, maybe basketball sized. And it'll just be hanging out on a tree limb. And what is happening is there are scout bees that are out looking for a new home for that swarm. maybe a hollow log, maybe an empty beehive, maybe somebody's like a hole in a house. Whoops, we don't actually want honeybees in our house usually. So they will be out, the scouts will be out looking for a new home, and then they'll come back and they'll give directions to the rest of the bees and they'll all go there. But the queen is actually not that great of a flyer, so they can't all fly around looking for the new hive. That wouldn't work. So most of the bees stay put with the queen until the scouts come back and tell them where they go, or until a beekeeper hears about the swarm, somebody calls them and they come and they take care of the swarm and they put it into a hive. But that's how we get feral bees, right? Earlier in the broadcast I mentioned feral bees. Feral wild bees have naturalized here in North America. So if you have beehives in your neighborhood, you'll probably see bees. Bees will forage for miles. They'll travel like 2 miles to forage, even further. They can't fly further. But there's kind of this, they travel pretty far to forage. And so if you have beehives in your neighborhood, you'll see them, right? But even if you don't have beehives in your neighborhood, you will probably occasionally at least see honeybees in your yard because of these feral colonies, these wild colonies. And so they're living in wooded areas, in abandoned farmland, and that's a good thing because those wild genetics are well adapted to regions, and they have, sometimes they have more resiliency against some of the bee diseases. And so those wild colonies are good to have because their drones are mating with the queens of the domestic colonies. So we want to help all those bees, and you definitely don't have to be a beekeeper to help bees. So we'll talk more about that when we get to our plant in just a minute. But let me tell you a little bit more about the bee life cycle, right? So we've talked about the queen. We've talked about what happens when the colony splits. The bees inside the hive are all females. Do you know that? Maybe you already know that. So like worker bees, if you see a bee getting nectar from a flower, you wouldn't say, look, he's collecting nectar. You would say, look, she's collecting nectar, right? Because all of the worker bees are females. And so they do lots of different jobs inside the hive and outside the hive. So at the beginning of their lives, so first you get the egg and then a larva, and then they cover up the top of the little cell. So let's see, you can kind of see larva in the bottom of this picture. And this one is not my picture. I wish I should have written on the back whose it was. I used it for some kids, a picture with some kids, but I'll try to find the credit for that and I'll add it in the comments if I can find it again. All right, so down in there you can see those little C's, and they're out of focus here, but those are little larvae. Like, they look like little maggots or little caterpillars, right? They're soft-bodied larvae. The worker bees are going to care for them and feed them. And so they then become pupa, and they pupate inside and they'll cover it up and it looks kind of like peanut butter on top. And then they'll hatch and they'll be worker bees. All right, so first job is housekeeping. So the worker bees for the first couple of days like clean their own cell out, and then they help empty other cells and they polish them up. And then they become undertakers and they take out any bees that have died. They dispose of those corpses as far away from the hive as they can, keep the hive sanitary, right? If they have diseased brood, if some of the larvae are diseased or dead, they'll take those out. They're very, very meticulous. They keep a very neat house. If you put an old piece of comb into a beehive, they will like clean it up. They'll get all the like dirt and dust and sticks, like little branches of anything or leaves off of it. So my hive had a little bit of like leaves from when I had captured the swarm. I just couldn't get all the leaves off before I put them into their hive. And so they worked really hard. They pulled it all down to the bottom and dragged it out the front of the beehive. It was really cool. All right, so then they spend about a week nursing baby bees. So they become the nurse bees. So they will go feed and care for those larvae. On average, a nurse bee checks on a larva about, well, on average, right, 1,300 times a day. So can you imagine they're just crawling back and forth over that comb, reaching in and feeding them, checking on them, caring for them, and then helping cover them up when it's time for them to pupate, right? So then they graduate from there to attend the queen bee. So some of the bees will always be workers for the queen bee, because she is just laying eggs all day, right? She's laying 1,000 to 2,000 eggs a day. She doesn't have time to stop and eat. So the bees bring her food. They bring her, they feed her, they groom her and care for the queen bee. All right, then they get older and it is time to leave the hive, and they get to go be collection bees. So they might go forage in the fields. They might also work as a bee fanner, so they'll fan the hive. And so they also those worker bees that fan the hive are letting off here we are pheromone, like this is our hive, and that helps the bees that are out foraging find their way back to the hive. And especially like in a bee yard where there's a bunch of bees, a bunch of beehives, that helps the bees to know which beehive is theirs. They know the smell of their other bees. All right, so then making sure I don't miss anybody here. All right, so we've got the older bees are out foraging for nectar and pollen. They're bringing both of those back to the hive. And we'll talk a little bit more about how amazing those foraging bees are when we get to our buckwheat. And then they begin to produce, older worker bees are old enough to produce beeswax. And so they actually produce this with their bodies. They're eating nectar and honey, and then they are creating these wax flakes that they like chew up and they build into the comb, right? So the wax flakes actually come off of out of their bodies. So pretty amazing. And then we've got the guard bees. If you look at a beehive and you go up to it carefully, you'll always see some bees standing guard at the entrance. And we watched a hive the other day at the park. We stood there and watched this beetle. It kept trying to get in, and you would see the guard bees like come out and push the beetle back out, and then it would try to get in again, and the guard bees would come and like push it back out, and they chased it away. And the beetle didn't make it in while we were standing there. Maybe it made it in later. All right, and then field bees. Oh, I skipped. So the first round of nectar bees are actually bringing the nectar into the hive from the field bees. So the field bees will regurgitate the nectar, and then the bees that are inside, the younger bees, will get that nectar and take it and turn it into honey. So I did skip one. This is why I have to have notes, right? All right, so we have got, Now we're to the field bees. All right, the field bees are amazing. They are going to be outside the hive. They're going to be looking for good sources of nectar and pollen. When they find them, they come back and they do a dance that's like a little bee shake their booty, and they go in a figure 8, and they can tell the other bees what direction to go and how far to go with their bee dance, which is amazing, right? And they can visit about 10 flowers a minute, and often a foraging bee will visit about 600 flowers during a trip. So as they go, they are pollinating, which is one of the reasons that we love to have them in our fields and in our gardens. They are collecting pollen for themselves, and they pack it into their little bee, I don't think I have a picture that shows that. They have on their legs, they have little bee pollen baskets, and they're like little hairs that are barbed hairs, and they can pack it in there, and then that way they can fly with it. And then they drink the nectar, and then they'll go back and regurgitate it to the other bees that are in the hive that are going to take that nectar and turn it into honey. So they are visiting a lot of flowers, but they need to, because to produce a single pint of honey, so this much honey, single pint, they need to visit, this is crazy to me, about 5 million flowers. 5 million flowers. And so they're foraging that 2 to 3 miles away. And so our gardens are an important source of food for bees, even when you don't keep bees. So now you've probably heard of colony collapse disorder, and you know maybe that the bees are in trouble, and they are for sure. Like there are major declines in honeybees, in all of our native bees, and in just invertebrates across the world. So the UN, I just was listening to a podcast that was talking about that the UN had declared that about 40% of our invertebrates were facing extinction. They were endangered. 40%? What? It's very worrisome, right? But the thing that is hopeful is that our gardens are places where we can shift that balance, and we can shift the balance back towards nature's balance, right? And so there's multiple ways we can do that. So we won't go into all the problems that bees are having right now, but we definitely could do another bee. There's so much we could talk about with bees. So if you're interested, tell me down in the comments below, and we can maybe do another bee week later this summer, and maybe I can get some video footage ahead of time inside the hive, which is really fascinating to get to see. I did not talk about the drone bees, did I? They are still important, even though they aren't worker bees. Let's talk about the drones. And then we're going to talk about what we can plant to help our bees. All right, so here's another quiz for you. Can you see this guy right here in the middle? It is the guy. There he is. All right, so that is our drone, and he's a lot bigger than the worker bees. And there's usually just maybe a few dozen, a few hundred in a hive. So there's not very many, but they have a really important job. They need to mate with the queen. And so they will, sometimes you can see them on the comb, they'll have like a puffed up top of their cell because they're bigger. Sometimes the bees, when they pull their own comb, if they're not building it on top of a man-made foundation, they will make bigger cells for the drones. So the drones are important. They hatch, and then their job is to go fly, mate with queens, and then they die. But that's important, right? That genetic diversity of the drones from different colonies mixing with the queens from different colonies is what gives our bees more resistance to changes in the environment and changes in just the local region as well. They can become adapted to their local region because of the genetic diversity in that region. All right, so drone bees are the boys. All right, now what can we do in our gardens to help bees? You definitely don't have to be a beekeeper to help bees. In fact, beekeeping is not directly even necessarily helping bees, right? So the reason to keep bees is because they're fascinating and interesting, and you want to learn more about them, and maybe you want honey, maybe some wax. But the bees are most helped when they have good habitat for foraging. And that's true for all the bees. All the bees, when they have good habitat for foraging, that's going to help our honeybees and our native bees and all the other pollinators and wildlife in our region. So your garden is going to be so great for that. So on Friday, we're going to talk about all kinds of things and like recommended plants and ways to think about planting and plants so that you really are creating this pollinator paradise. But today I want you to think about one idea, and that is cover crops. So this is buckwheat. So let's see if I can bring it closer to you and maybe get it to focus here. Can I get it to focus closer? Let's see, we'll pull it back just a little bit. So buckwheat is a grain crop. That is a great summer cover crop. And I recommend that you have a bag of it in your garden shed or your house, a bag of seed ready to go. So it makes the seeds are edible. You could use them for buckwheat flour, or you can cook them like you cook oatmeal. And they're little triangle shaped seeds. See that? Little triangle shaped seeds. And it'll be brown when it's ripe. This one just pulled this one off the plant. But this is a great crop to plant in any empty spaces. So look around your garden. Do you use cover crops right now? I'm curious. Tell me in the comments below, like if you're already using a cover crop, what kind of cover crop do you usually use? This buckwheat is one of my favorites for summer because it grows fast and it puts on flowers fast, and the bees love it and lots of other insects love it. There's the leaf shape of buckwheat, kind of an arrowhead, sagittate leaf. Then there's all kinds of other benefits, right? So it's going to put on flowers, it's going to feed the bees. You can then chop it down before it makes seed if you want. and let it be mulch, let it be incorporated into the soil as like a green manure. Or you can let it go to seed, and we've actually let ours go to seed and it's kind of naturalized a little bit. We have it coming up even when we haven't planted it, which is okay with me. If I have weeds that like are positive, good weeds filling in the holes, I totally don't mind that, right? I don't know about you. Do you have certain like weeds that you let stay in your garden? So you can let it go to seed, you can harvest the seed, you can just let it drop. And then it's going to be improving your soil because of the mulch or the green manure. It's going to be feeding the pollinators. It's also going to be preventing erosion because it's going to be covering the soil and helping slow evaporation because it'll shade the soil. So look around your yard. Are there places where maybe you harvested like some broccoli or some cauliflower and you're pulling those plants out because they're done? Did you have something that got diseased that you're like, oh, I don't want to plant another tomato there because the first tomato I planted had wilt or something like that? Put in some buckwheat. Another cover crop would work as well. You could use other cover crops if you're not sure about buckwheat, but clovers are another great one for bees. So there's red clover and white clover, and there's some clover that gets tall and some clover that stays short. And it has the added benefit of being a nitrogen fixer. And so when you're looking around your yard, look for those empty spots and think about how you could fill them with something like buckwheat that would help wildlife. So it's space you're not using, and you could grow something that's going to both improve your soil and feed the bees. All right, so we are going to be back this week each day about noon. I'll be back with another animal and plant pairing, pollinator and plants, things that we can grow in our yards to really make a difference, right? That we can, yard by yard by yard, we can make a better place for these bees to forage and live. I don't know, sometimes I drive around on my way places and I look at yards and I just think, ooh, what if instead of just expanses of grass, you know, there's a place for an expanse of grass when you want to have somewhere to run and play and like kids to kick a ball around in, right? That's important. But what about if along every edge and if in those yards that never get played in, we kind of replaced it with food plants for us and food plants for wildlife? What if we could do that? Wouldn't that be amazing? So let's start with our own yards. Sign up for that workshop on Friday. I would love to see you then, and catch each day. We'll have a tip, another discussion and tips for you at noon. So until I see you again, thank you so much for joining me, and happy gardening.